What were African American fast food restaurants really like back when flavor and pride filled every booth? They were places where soul met hustle and community came alive. When did that kind of warmth disappear? Fried whiting sandwiches were the kind of meal you could smell before you ever saw the sign. Hot oil popped and hissed behind the counter, and that golden fish hit the bread still sizzling. 2 slices of soft white bread, a drizzle of hot sauce, and maybe a few pickles if you were lucky. That was all it took. It was simple, but it was perfect. Every Black-owned lunch counter had its version, each with its own little twist. Some used cornmeal for crunch, others used flour for a lighter crust. But they all shared one truth: you did not need fancy bread to make something worth craving. Fried whiting sandwiches filled bellies between work shifts, road trips, or after church, and the flavor stuck with you longer than the grease. It was the kind of sandwich that carried a story, the taste of hustle, resilience, and community. In a world that often ignored Black excellence, these sandwiches were proof that genius lived in everyday kitchens. You could buy one for pocket change, but it tasted like pride. Smothered pork chops were not fast food in theory, but in practice they became a working man's comfort. You would walk into a small counter cafe, order a plate, and within minutes, steam would rise from a tray filled with gravy so rich it could drown your worries. Tender pork chops were fried, then covered in onions, pepper, and brown gravy until they melted with each bite. The meal came with rice and a scoop of collard greens, maybe cornbread if the cook liked you that day. The scent of onion gravy would cling to your clothes all afternoon, a perfume of good eating and honest work. These plates came from home kitchens turned commercial, where recipes were passed down, not written down. The taste reminded diners of Sunday dinners at their grandmother's table, even if they were grabbing a quick lunch before heading back to the factory. It was fast food, yes, but never rushed food. It was care-served hot, on a budget with love. Sweet potato pie by the slice was the quiet joy of a Sunday afternoon. Long before fast food chains made dessert a marketing slogan, Black-owned cafes had pies cooling in the window, drawing folks in after church like a hymn. The crusts were flaky, the filling rich with nutmeg, cinnamon, and family secrets. You could order one slice with your coffee and end up staying an hour just talking with whoever sat beside you. Some people said the pie tasted better after the sermon, others said it was the taste of rest itself. Every neighborhood had that one spot known for its pie, where the owner, usually someone's auntie, knew how to serve sweetness with kindness. It was dessert, but it was also communion, the sharing of comfort, of laughter, of something earned. The pie was not just food, it was proof that soul could be baked. And when it was gone, you did not just miss the taste, you missed the feeling it gave you. The rise of the Chitlin Circuit diners was the heartbeat of Black travel culture. When entertainers and musicians could not eat at white-only establishments, these roadside cafes became sanctuaries. They served fried chicken, pork sandwiches, and pies. But what they really fed was freedom. You might see a bluesman at one table, a gospel group at another, truck drivers and families filling the rest. The jukebox hummed, the kitchen never stopped, and the road outside pulsed with stories. Every plate carried pride. Every tip was a thank you for safe passage. These diners became more than businesses. They were lifelines, waypoints on the map of resistance. Signs like "Colored Cafe" once marked exclusion. Here, they meant welcome. The Chitlin Circuit was more than a route. It was a promise that no traveler would go hungry, in body or in spirit. Collard greens with cornbread muffins turned a paper tray into a piece of home. Even the busiest diners served them, not because they were cheap, but because they were necessary. Greens simmered all morning with smoked turkey necks or ham hocks, seasoned until the broth turned silky and deep. Cornbread muffins came out hot, golden, and tender enough to crumble in your hands. You could soak them right into the Potlikker and feel the day's tension leave your shoulders. This was comfort disguised as a side dish, soul food in its most democratic form. No matter your paycheck, you could afford dignity here. The greens told stories of the South, the soil, and survival, The muffins reminded you that sweetness could still be simple. Together, they made fast food feel like a family dinner. Hot sausage sandwiches were the kind of street food that woke you up from the inside out. Sold from corner stands in cities like New Orleans and Philadelphia, they came wrapped in wax paper so thin the grease soaked right through. The smell alone could stop traffic. A spicy link, seared to perfection, tucked into a soft roll and drowned in mustard, onions, and hot sauce. Some people added bell peppers. Others swore by a slice of melted cheese. It was cheap, quick, and unforgettable, every bite a little burn of joy. These sandwiches were for people who lived fast and worked hard, the kind of food that kept your hands busy and your heart full. They carried a neighborhood's signature, the taste of its people, its heat, and its rhythm. The cafe jukebox culture was where food and music met like old friends. Step into one of those restaurants, and the air would hum before you even sat down. A chrome jukebox glowed in the corner, its glass lit by neon pink and blue, waiting for a coin and a choice. James Brown, Aretha Franklin, Sam Cooke, the voices that carried you through heartbreak or celebration. Between the fryers popping and the laughter rising, you could hear community being built in real time. Teenagers danced by the counter, elders nodded along from their booths. The jukebox was the soul of the cafe, a kind of second heartbeat that reminded everyone they belonged. Every song was a story, every bite a memory set to rhythm. Red Kool-Aid and fountain drinks were the liquid joy of the neighborhood, the kind of sweetness that made even the hottest afternoon feel like a holiday. No matter what the menu looked like, there was always a big red jug sitting behind the counter, sweating beads of condensation under the summer heat. That color, the deep, unapologetic red, was not just a drink. It was an emotion. Kids would line up with their paper cups, smiling wide, while parents exchanged knowing looks that said, "This is the taste of home." You could find it everywhere, at fish fries, church picnics, school fundraisers, or corner cafes that played Sam Cooke on the radio. It was poured by hand, made strong, and never measured. Too sweet? Maybe. But that was the point. It was bold joy in liquid form. It turned meals into memories and strangers into neighbors. Before branding ruled the world of taste, red Kool-Aid was what community looked like in a glass, bright, messy, and full of heart. It was not about presentation, it was about togetherness. Every sip said, "You belong here." And for one perfect moment, that was all that mattered. Flavor unfiltered, poured with care, and remembered long after the cup was empty. Homemade fried chicken buckets were the blueprint for comfort food before fast food chains ever dreamed of franchising it. Every neighborhood joint had its own blend of seasoning. Some leaned heavy on paprika, others whispered garlic and black pepper secrets passed down from mothers and aunts. The chicken would hit the fryer and sing, golden brown on the outside, tender and steaming on the inside. Families bought buckets to share at church picnics, barbershops, and front porch dinners, where laughter drowned out the city noise. You did not need a logo to know where it came from. The smell alone told you who cooked it. Grease-stained paper buckets were the only containers that mattered, holding love, effort, and pride. This food was made for passing hands, not for drive-through windows. It carried the rhythm of kitchens that never got quiet, and of women who could season better than any recipe could teach. Fried chicken in these buckets was more than a meal. It was a memory in motion, an edible heirloom. When you reached in for a drumstick, you were tasting tradition, freedom, and everything that made a community feel alive. This was the real deal. Fast food, yes, but made slow, made right, and made with soul. Catfish nugget baskets were the bite-sized gift of the Southern kitchen, crispy, tender, and seasoned with stories. Dipped in cornmeal and fried to a perfect crunch, each piece carried the scent of riverbanks and church fish fries. The nuggets came piled high in wax paper trays, glistening with oil and pride, served with tartar sauce or hot sauce that always seemed to drip down your wrist. They were food for the hands, food for the moment, snatched up between laughter, conversation, or a walk down the block with friends. You could taste the care in every bite, the quiet craftsmanship of cooks who knew the line between golden and burnt by instinct, not by timer. Friday nights were for sharing baskets on stoops, while Sundays after church brought the same meal dressed up in paper napkins and joy. Catfish nuggets were quick, yes, but never careless. They spoke to the balance of survival and creativity, turning simple ingredients into something extraordinary. No chain could mimic that crunch or the warmth behind it. It was fast food with memory attached, a flavor that traveled through generations. In every basket was a reminder that soul food was not defined by cost. It was defined by love, and that made it priceless. Soul burgers on toasted buns were the crown jewel of many Black-owned fast food joints, a humble masterpiece built from sweat, smoke, and skill. The griddle hissed as onions caramelized next to hand-pressed beef patties, their edges crisped in a layer of flavor no chain could ever fake. The buns were toasted just enough to hold the mustard, relish, and grease that dripped with every bite. You could hear that sizzle before you even opened the door, smell the mix of meat and spice curling through the air like a promise. There was no secret menu, no fancy toppings, just good food made with rhythm and pride. Each burger was built to order, wrapped tight in wax paper, warm enough to burn your fingers but too good to wait on. Some came with pickles, others with hot sauce, but all came with the same care. These soul burgers were the taste of independence, of corner stands that refused to fade. They were not just sandwiches, they were statements. You might forget the name of the place, but never the flavor that lingered long after the last bite. It was comfort on a toasted bun, a story told in mustard and meat. Gizzards and fries specials were the working man's reward after a long day's grind. Fried until golden and peppery, the gizzards had a satisfying chew, part snack, part tradition. They came piled in paper boats beside hand-cut fries, a drizzle of hot sauce completing the deal. Every neighborhood spot had them, usually sold for pocket change and meant to be eaten standing up or sitting on a car hood with friends. The smell of seasoned oil hung in the air, mixing with laughter and the rhythm of nearby radios. It was not fancy, but it was everything. Hot, quick, filling, and made by people who understood flavor without needing to measure it. Some called gizzards poor man's food, but those who knew better called it a delicacy. Each crunchy bite carried generations of Southern know-how, how to make something out of little and make it taste like plenty. They were proof that thrift could taste like luxury when done right. In those carry-out joints, gizzards were not leftovers, they were legend. The corner carry-out window was the heartbeat of every block. Before fast food became a corporation, it was a person leaning through a screen, handing you a hot meal with a smile. Regulars lined up between shifts, trading jokes while waiting on their paper-wrapped orders. You did not need a dining room when you had the sidewalk. Fried fish, burgers, chicken, or fries. It all came through that little window, hot, quick, and made from scratch. The cook knew your name, your usual, and sometimes even your mother's order before you asked. The food was local currency, traded for loyalty and laughter. Carry-out windows were safe spaces where working folks could gather, eat, and breathe for a moment before heading back into the world. It was fast food that still felt human. Grease-stained, sure, but genuine. Even after the last light flickered off, the smell of frying oil lingered, marking the spot where flavor met friendship. Barbecue sandwiches with vinegar slaw were slow-cooked miracles disguised as quick meals. Pulled pork smoked overnight was piled high onto soft buns, the sauce dripping down your wrists before you could even take a bite. The tang of the vinegar slaw cut through the sweetness of the barbecue, balancing every mouthful perfectly. Each sandwich came wrapped in butcher paper, simple, messy, and impossible to eat neatly. The flavor came from patience, from fire tended by hand and stories told over the pit. In Black-owned barbecue shops, time was the main ingredient, and it showed. The meat fell apart at the touch of a fork, the sauce stained everything it touched, and nobody minded one bit. Folks would drive across town just to get one, sometimes waiting in line outside while the smoke curled from the back lot. These sandwiches were not fast, they were earned. A working man's feast for the price of a sandwich, wrapped tight and handed over with a nod. Hand-cut French fries in paper bags were proof that fast food could still feel like home. You could hear them sizzling before you saw them. Fresh potatoes sliced by hand, dropped twice into hot oil until they were golden and crisp. When they came out, the cook would toss them with salt in a brown paper bag, shaking it until grease spots bloomed across the surface. No fancy packaging, no frozen shortcuts, just the sound of paper rustling and the smell of something real. The fries were soft inside, crunchy outside, perfectly imperfect. Some shops seasoned them with pepper or paprika, others swore salt was all they needed. They came steaming hot, too hot to grab more than one at a time, and everyone knew that was part of the fun. These fries were meant to be shared, passed between friends in parking lots and back seats. They reminded people that simple food, made right, could be unforgettable. Every bite tasted like care. Every bag told a story of pride. The soul food drive-in trend was where Southern flavor met 1950s car culture in a swirl of chrome and smoke. Picture rows of gleaming cars lined up under neon signs, engines humming while trays of smothered chicken, collard greens, and cornbread were served through car windows. It was fast food but soulful, where black cooks took the idea of the drive-in and made it their own. These were places filled with laughter, gospel, and rhythm and blues floating through the night air. Teenagers flirted over sodas, families shared fried catfish dinners, and jukebox songs turned parking lots into block parties. The food might have been served quick, but it was cooked slow, seasoned deep, and carried love in every bite. The soul food drive-in was more than convenience. It was community on wheels, a safe haven where people could eat, dance, and dream under the same stars. Fried okra snack cups turned vegetables into finger food glory. Served in paper cups like popcorn, they were bite-sized, golden, and addictive. The okra was sliced thin, dipped in cornmeal batter, and fried until crisp, the heat locking in its earthy flavor. You could munch them while talking on the corner, watching kids play, or waiting for your next plate to finish cooking. It was simple, shared joy, one that filled bellies and sparked conversation. Some stands seasoned theirs with cayenne for a kick, while others kept it mild and homey. Either way, it was impossible to stop at just one handful. Fried okra reminded everyone that soul food was never wasteful. It was creative, resourceful, and proud of every humble ingredient. Each cup was comfort disguised as a snack, proof that community cooking could turn even the smallest things into a feast worth gathering for. Banana pudding in to-go cups was the sweet encore that no one ever turned down, a dessert that carried generations of memory in every creamy spoonful. Layers of smooth pudding, crisp Nilla wafers, and soft banana slices created a perfect balance of texture, rich, cool, and nostalgic. In every cafe, someone had a version their grandmother swore by. Some added meringue toasted golden on top, others preferred whipped cream and a sprinkle of nutmeg. The to-go cup made it convenient, but this was not fast food in spirit. It was soul food with a slow heart. You could take it home, but most people could not resist eating it right there, sitting in parked cars with the windows down or in plastic booths under humming lights. Each bite tasted like Sunday after church, like laughter shared across folding tables and hymn-filled afternoons. It was not a fancy dessert. It was a familiar one, built on comfort rather than perfection. Even the way the pudding softened the wafers over time felt intentional, as though sweetness was meant to melt into memory. Banana pudding in to-go cups proved that the end of a meal could still feel like the beginning of a story. A final taste that lingered like kindness. Neighborhood barbecue pits were the weekend's heartbeat, filling entire blocks with smoke, laughter, and the smell of slow-cooked joy. Behind every restaurant, you could find a rusted drum smoker or brick pit glowing with coals, tended by hands that knew fire like scripture. Oak and hickory wood burned low, sending up clouds that danced through alleyways and drew neighbors out onto porches. Ribs, chicken, and sausage links sizzled under the pitmaster's watchful eye, each brushed with sauce made from recipes carried through generations and never written down. it was a labor of patience. Every turn of meat, a quiet act of care. Families waited in long lines, children holding paper plates, their faces lit by the orange glow of the coals. The barbecue pit was not just a kitchen, it was a gathering place, a drumbeat of togetherness that stretched into every Saturday afternoon. When you finally took that first bite, smoky and sweet, it tasted like community itself, earned, shared, and celebrated. Even after the fire died down, the scent lingered on your clothes, a reminder that joy, like good barbecue, always takes its time. The smoke became memory, rising skyward with every satisfied sigh. Turkey necks and rice plates were proof that flavor could thrive in the humblest corners of the kitchen. Simmered for hours until the meat slipped tender from the bone, turkey necks made a broth so rich it clung to every grain of rice like velvet. This was a dish born from creativity and necessity, made by cooks who could turn anything into comfort. The smell filled whole blocks, savory, smoky, and slow. Served in paper trays for lunch, it became a quiet favorite in diners, church halls, and drive-ins across the South. People lined up not for luxury, but for love cooked on a budget. The cooks stretched every dollar, transforming thrift into something divine. The rice soaked up the juices until it gleamed, and a dash of hot sauce on top sealed the deal. It was food that told the truth. You did not need fancy ingredients to eat well, only patience and pride. Each bite felt like a lesson in endurance, rich, soulful, and deeply human. Turkey necks and rice were more than a meal. They were history served hot, proof that nothing is wasted when you cook with heart. The Sunday post-church rush was a sight that turned every restaurant into a celebration. Families arrived still dressed in their Sunday best, pressed suits, shining shoes, and wide hats that caught the morning light. The smell of fried chicken, sweet yams, and cornbread filled the air before the first hymn had even faded. It was more than a meal. It was a ritual, a continuation of worship in a different form. Children fidgeted in the booths while mothers shared stories across coffee cups, and fathers carved meat with the same patience they carried from the pew. Every table held gratitude, laughter, and the gentle rhythm of community. The waitresses called everyone baby, and no one minded the long lines because the food was worth every minute. Plates clattered, voices rose, and for a brief moment, the whole neighborhood seemed gathered under one roof. In those cafes, faith and flavor met like old friends. The Sunday rush was not just about eating, it was about belonging, about tasting joy after prayer. You could always tell who came straight from church by the way they smiled when the biscuits hit the table. It was a holy kind of hunger, fed with love and good seasoning. Soul Stew lunch counters were the heartbeat of working life, quick, affordable, and deeply comforting. Picture a long steam line glistening under metal lids, each one revealing another miracle of flavor. Fried chicken, oxtails, mac and cheese, collard greens, and cornbread waited like loyal friends. Customers moved through the line with practiced grace, sliding trays, chatting with cooks, and balancing choices like it was an art form. You could get a plate, a glass of sweet tea, and still have change left over. The smell alone could pull you in off the street. These counters were equal parts kitchen and conversation, where people caught up on neighborhood news, laughed over daily gossip, or found a moment of peace before the next shift. The cooks moved with purpose, ladling gravy and handing out smiles in equal measure. Every dish told a story of someone's mother, someone's memory, someone's love. The lunch rush came fast and ended faster, but for those few minutes, everyone shared the same table, even if they sat apart. It was fast food, but with a soul so deep it could slow time itself. Buttermilk biscuit sandwiches were the quiet pride of every Southern-style breakfast spot. Each one began before sunrise when cooks dusted flour over wooden counters and rolled out dough by hand. The biscuits came out of the oven flaky, golden, and steaming, split open just enough to cradle whatever the day called for: fried chicken, sausage, eggs, or even leftover catfish from the night before. Butter melted instantly, soaking through every layer until the whole thing glistened. They were served in wax paper, warm enough to fog your fingers, eaten on porches, work trucks, and diner stools. You could hear the crunch of each bite over the hum of the morning radio. Buttermilk biscuits were not about luxury, they were about care. Every cook had their own secret: cold butter, cast iron pans, or a prayer whispered before baking. In neighborhoods across the South, the smell of those biscuits meant a new day had begun. Whether sold from a cafe window or passed down a church hallway, they carried the same truth: love rises, just like dough. Cornbread dressing with gravy boats was how the holidays announced themselves in local soul diners. The dish only appeared when the season felt right, usually around Thanksgiving or during church homecomings, when families gathered in numbers too big for one kitchen. Crumbled cornbread, onions, celery, and sage mixed together with broth to create something far greater than the sum of its parts. And then came the gravy, rich, brown, and silky, poured from glass boats that made everyone lean forward in anticipation. It tasted like family reunions and long tables covered in foil pans. The cooks made it in batches big enough to feed an army, and somehow there was always enough for one more plate. People sat shoulder to shoulder, laughing, sharing, and eating until it felt like Sunday twice over. Cornbread dressing was not just food, it was fellowship, memory, and gratitude baked together. It was the kind of dish that tasted like home, even if you were miles away from it. The mom-and-pop signage aesthetic was an art form all its own, a living gallery of pride and creativity painted on brick walls and storefronts across Black America. Hand-lettered menus, bright murals, and neon lights told stories before you even stepped inside. Each sign was a reflection of its owner's dreams, some written in perfect cursive, others a little crooked but full of heart. Words like "Best in Town" or "Since 1948" stood tall beside hand-drawn plates of ribs or golden fried fish. At night, the glow of the neon turned the block into a beacon, a soft pulse of community warmth. There was no marketing department, just steady hands, leftover paint, and a promise kept through good food. The signs weathered storms, sun, and time, but they never stopped shining. You could drive through a city and tell which spots fed souls just by their hand-painted letters. These weren't franchises, they were family legacies, written in brushstrokes and grease stains. Every light that flickered was a heartbeat, reminding passersby that this was where flavor and love still lived. Fried green tomato sandwiches turned the ordinary into the unforgettable. Tart green tomatoes were sliced thick, dredged in cornmeal, and fried until crisp on the outside but tender within. Layered with lettuce, mayo, and sometimes a strip of bacon, they created a perfect balance of crunch and cream. The flavor was bright, southern, and bold, proof that even a humble vegetable could shine under the right hands. Diners served them on toasted white bread or soft rolls, wrapped in paper so thin you could see the oil marks before the first bite. Each sandwich carried that delicate tang of home gardens and summertime kitchens. It was the taste of patience, of waiting for just the right shade of green before frying. Fried green tomato sandwiches turned quick meals into stories worth remembering. They were not just a snack. They were a salute to every cook who knew how to make the most of what they had. Sweet tea and lemonade mix, what many would later call an Arnold Palmer, was the unofficial anthem of soul diners. The tea came strong and sweet, brewed in giant glass pitchers that glowed amber in the sunlight. The lemonade cut through it with just enough tartness to keep you coming back for more. It was the perfect balance of sugar and sting, served over ice in tall plastic cups that sweated onto every table. You could find it at every cafe, barbecue pit, and church event. Kids drank it like candy, and adults sipped it slow, knowing it was the one drink that truly belonged to everyone. Each sip tasted like southern afternoons, slow, golden, and generous. It was not just a refreshment, it was a ritual of welcome. The mix became a signature flavor, proof that the simplest combinations can outlast every trend. Sweet tea and lemonade were two halves of the same heart, poured together in harmony. Gospel brunch buffets were the meeting point of faith, family, and flavor. The doors opened to the sound of live choirs, their voices filling the room before the scent of food even reached you. Platters of fried chicken, catfish, waffles, and peach cobbler lined the buffet tables. People filled their plates while tapping their feet to the rhythm of a hymn. Between bites, someone might shout, "Amen," and the whole room would laugh. These brunches were less about the menu and more about the moment, about celebrating community through music and good food. Choir robes brushed against Sunday dresses, and children danced near the tables as elders clapped in time. The air felt electric, alive with gratitude. Gospel brunch buffets were a full-body experience, sound, soul, and sustenance blending perfectly together. You did not just leave full, you left renewed. Local pitmaster rivalries were the neighborhood's favorite kind of drama. Every barbecue joint claimed to have the best sauce, the perfect smoke, the most tender ribs. Signs out front boasted, "Voted #1," but the real competition happened quietly, through whispers, nods, and long lines on Saturdays. Each pit had its secrets. Some swore by applewood, others by mesquite. The sauce recipes were guarded tighter than family heirlooms. People picked sides and stayed loyal, sometimes driving past 2 other places just to get to their favorite. But behind the rivalry was respect, an understanding that everyone chasing perfection was part of the same brotherhood of smoke. The air around those blocks was thick with pride and Hickory, and no one really lost because the whole neighborhood got fed. Homemade pound cake on display counters was the silent star of every diner. It sat under a glass dome beside the register, golden and patient, waiting to be sliced. The edges were crisp, the inside buttery and soft, smelling faintly of vanilla and lemon zest. Every cook swore theirs was the best. Made with love and real butter, they'd say. A slice cost a few dollars, but it tasted like care you could not price. It was the dessert that did not need frosting or fancy plates. It stood on flavor alone. Regulars would grab a piece to go with their coffee or order one to take home for later that never made it past the car ride. The cake's presence said something important. You were in a place that still believed in tradition. Every crumb told a story of pride, patience, and sweetness that lasted. Collard green Potlikker soup was proof that nothing in the kitchen went to waste. After collard greens were boiled with ham hocks or smoked meat, the leftover broth was packed with nutrients and flavor. Families would save it, thicken it with beans, rice, or cornbread crumbs, and serve it as a soup. It turned what could have been discarded liquid into a meal that could stretch for days. Potlikker was praised for its richness and vitamins, especially during times when fresh vegetables were limited. Black families in the South cherished it as part of their food culture, a reminder that even scraps held value. The taste of Potlikker soup was smoky, salty, and comforting, carrying both sustenance and heritage in every bowl. It reminded people that resourcefulness was a form of survival and strength. For many households, it was a dish that fed both body and spirit when times were most difficult. Hickory nut milk delivered rich nutrition from the forests when dairy was limited or unavailable. Hickory nuts were cracked and pounded into a fragrant paste, then steeped in hot water and strained to produce a creamy liquid full of natural oils and protein. This drink could be enjoyed warm as a morning beverage or used to enrich cornbread and porridges, offering sustenance without reliance on cow's milk. The technique drew directly from indigenous American practices, which African cooks learned and adapted to their own needs. Hickory trees were plentiful across the Southeast, ensuring a steady supply for those willing to gather and crack the tough shells. Even after emancipation, rural families continued making hickory milk for special dishes, and some Appalachian recipes still call for it today. Its smooth flavor and nourishing qualities illustrate how African American cooks combined local knowledge and Old World methods to create foods of lasting value. Hickory nut milk stands as a quiet but powerful symbol of ingenuity, linking the forest's bounty to a tradition of resilience and culinary skill. Okra gumbo with fresh crab told the story of low-country waters and West African roots in every bowl. Thickened by the natural mucilage of okra and deepened with a slow-simmered stock, the stew held blue crab, onions, bell peppers, and fragrant spices that reflected both coastal bounty and ancestral memory. Fishermen brought the catch of the day to markets where cooks bargained for the sweetest crab meat, while home gardeners plucked tender okra pods from vines that thrived in humid summers. The gumbo pot became a gathering place where family and neighbors stood around sharing stories as the aroma of seafood and spice filled the air. Served over rice, each spoonful carried the taste of tides, soil, and a heritage that stretched back across the Atlantic. In modern times, many turned to faster recipes and frozen ingredients, losing the patient layering of flavor that once defined this dish. Yet for those who remember, nothing matches the soulful depth of a true okra gumbo made with freshly caught crab. Butter beans and rice were another cheap but comforting meal that carried families through lean times. Butter beans, with their creamy texture, were slow cooked until tender, often flavored with a smoked ham hock or bone if one was available. The smoky taste infused the beans and created a rich broth that poured beautifully over rice. My grandmother used long-grain rice that stretched a pot of beans into enough servings for the whole household. The dish was hearty, filling, and nourishing, feeding both body and spirit. Butter beans were inexpensive compared to meat, yet they carried enough protein to keep families going strong. Children learned to appreciate the soft beans and flavorful broth as part of everyday meals, and adults recognized their value in stretching budgets. It was not a dish of extravagance but of practicality, a dinner that turned cheap staples into something people looked forward to. Butter beans and rice told the story of resilience in kitchens where every penny counted and every plate needed to satisfy. Chicken neck gravy was the very definition of stretching scraps into a full meal. Poultry was expensive and few families could afford large cuts, so nothing from a chicken ever went to waste. Necks were simmered slowly to release every bit of flavor, then thickened into a gravy with flour and drippings. Poured over rice, mashed potatoes, or biscuits, it transformed the cheapest part of the bird into something filling and comforting. Families looked forward to it because it stretched one bird into several meals, ensuring nothing was thrown away. This kind of resourcefulness defined survival cooking, and for many Black families in the South, it was routine. Chicken neck gravy might not have been glamorous, but it represented pride in making the most out of very little. It also carried the feeling of home, the scent of gravy simmering on the stove, and the relief of knowing everyone at the table would leave fed. Corncob jelly turned what most people threw away into a shimmering golden spread that brightened plain breads and biscuits. After kernels were cut from the cob for other uses, the remaining cores were boiled for a long time to draw out natural starch and pectin. The liquid was strained, sweetened with a modest amount of sugar or honey when available, and cooked again until it thickened into a soft jelly with a delicate corn flavor. Enslaved cooks perfected this transformation, ensuring nothing went to waste and every scrap contributed to nourishment. Long after emancipation, rural homesteaders and Depression-era families embraced corncob jelly as a thrifty delicacy, and it still appears at Southern craft fairs and heritage festivals. The gentle sweetness and faintly toasted aroma offer a taste of memory and ingenuity. Corncob jelly proves that culinary creativity can turn the most humble remnants of the harvest into something beautiful, a spread that honors the perseverance of those who found flavor and comfort in the very parts of the plant others overlooked. Pickled watermelon rind turned summer scraps into something bright and memorable when waste was never an option. Families peeled the green rinds from sweet watermelons, cut them into strips, and simmered them in a brine of vinegar, sugar, and warm spices until the pieces turned translucent and tender. The finished pickles carried a gentle sweetness with a tart kick that balanced fried fish or smoky barbecued pork. Children often helped pack the jars, laughing as the kitchen filled with the scent of cinnamon and clove. These jars lined pantry shelves and cooled in cellars, ready to brighten winter meals with a taste of summer. For many households, this thrifty condiment was a sign of careful planning and pride in making every harvest last. Today, few people bother to save the rinds, and the recipe hides in old notebooks and fading memories. Yet those who remember speak of the surprising pleasure of that sweet, sour crunch beside a plate of fried catfish. Pumpkin stew with onions was the kind of dish that proved homegrown vegetables could anchor a meal. Pumpkins were easy to plant, easy to store, and yielded enough flesh to keep a family fed for weeks. My grandmother peeled chunks of pumpkin, cooked them down with onions, and let the pot simmer until it turned thick and savory. The sweetness of the pumpkin mixed with the sharpness of onion, creating a balance that felt hearty and satisfying. Sometimes she added a little pepper or a leftover bone for extra flavor, but even plain, the stew was filling. Served with bread or cornbread, it was enough to feed a household without meat or costly ingredients. In the 1960s, pumpkins were not just for pies or holidays, they were staples, pulled from backyard gardens and turned into supper. The stew carried warmth, thrift, and creativity in every spoonful. Pumpkin stew with onions showed that survival did not mean going without taste, only learning to love what the land gave freely. Stewed okra and tomatoes were the kind of dish that took simple garden produce and turned it into something nourishing enough to feed a family. Okra, a vegetable with African origins, thrived in southern soil, while tomatoes grew easily in backyard gardens. Together, simmered slowly with onions, spices, and sometimes a scrap of salt pork, they created a stew that was tangy, savory, and thick. Families relied on it because it stretched small harvests into larger meals, often served over rice or with cornbread to make it filling. The dish was especially important when meat was too expensive to buy, as it added depth and nutrition without needing animal protein. Stewed okra and tomatoes became more than food. They were a way to survive with what the land provided. For many, the taste carried reminders of summer gardens and the hard work it took to keep families fed. It was frugal, delicious, and a perfect example of survival cooking. Pine needle tea offered a bright and restorative drink when fresh produce was scarce during cold months. Enslaved foragers collected the youngest green needles from longleaf and loblolly pines, rinsed them carefully, and steeped them in hot water until the brew released a light citrus aroma. Rich in vitamin C, this tea helped ward off scurvy and brought a welcome freshness to winter diets heavy with salt-preserved foods. The practice echoed both indigenous traditions and West African herbal knowledge, merging two continents' wisdom into a single sustaining cup. Families continued to brew pine needle tea well after emancipation, and it remains popular among modern herbalists for its gentle flavor and reputed immune-boosting qualities. Its evergreen scent and warm golden color remind us that even in the most barren season, the forest offered nourishment. Pine needle tea illustrates how observing the land and respecting its cycles allowed people to find both medicine and comfort, turning what others overlooked into a sustaining daily ritual that strengthened body and spirit alike. Field pea salad with hot pepper vinegar offered a cool bite for the hottest southern evenings. Tender field peas were boiled until just soft, then chilled and tossed with diced onions, sweet peppers, and a splash of sharp vinegar infused with fiery peppers. The salad balanced earthy legumes with a bright tang that woke the palate after long days in the sun. Served on wide porches as cicadas sang, it accompanied fried chicken, grilled fish, or simply a hunk of cornbread. Home gardeners prized field peas for their reliability in poor soil, and the vinegar peppers were often homemade, steeped for weeks in glass bottles on sunny windowsills. Guests at summer suppers remembered the sting of the vinegar and the gentle sweetness of the peas as the taste of true Southern hospitality. Today, packaged beans and bottled dressings have replaced the careful soaking and seasoning that once defined the dish, but the memory of its crisp, refreshing bite lingers in kitchens where tradition still holds strong. Homemade cornmeal pancakes for supper were another way families stretched basic ingredients into a filling meal. Flour, cornmeal, lard, and milk came together in a batter that fried into golden cakes on a hot skillet. My grandmother served them stacked, drizzled with syrup if any was available, or eaten plain with butter when syrup was gone. The pancakes were fluffy yet hearty, giving enough energy to hold a family until morning. They cost next to nothing but fed many, which was exactly what mattered most. Children loved the sweetness when syrup was added, while adults appreciated the sheer substance of the cakes. In the 1960s, cornmeal pancakes were a staple when meat was scarce, turning humble ingredients into something warm and reliable. It was comfort food born of necessity, one of those meals that never left memory even as times changed. Homemade cornmeal pancakes carried the spirit of thrift, filling plates with love and survival. Comment your favorite soul food memory, hit like, and subscribe to keep these flavors and stories alive.